Offering my humble pranams at Swami's lotus feet, respected elders and my dear brothers and sisters Sai Ram. It's my honor to welcome Brother Balu Karnam, our national president, to come forward and introduce the program. Sai Ram.
Saram. Offering my most humble salutations at the lotus feet of Swami, sisters, brothers, and members of the Sai family of the Sathya Sai Global Council. Welcome you all for today's program entitled Sri Sathya Sai Spiritual Education, a Journey Through Time. It is my honor and privilege to introduce today's panelists, Mrs. Berniece Mead, Mrs. Geetha Ram, and Mrs. Sumana Murali. So starting with Mrs. Berniece Mead, she got her bachelor's degree in elementary education from Oklahoma, from College for Women. Then she went on to finish her master's in education from Redlands University in California. Professionally, she worked as a elementary teacher for grades kindergarten to 8th grade for 30 years in the states of Texas, Oklahoma, and California. She is married with 2 children and 2 grandchildren. And coming to Swami's organization activity, she volunteered with the work with Sri Sathya Sai organization in education wing, training teachers in character education in both public and private schools, as well as the spiritual organization. This is a program based on 5 human values: truth, right action, peace, love, and non-violence, and is called Educare, which is meaning bringing out the inside core values, these human values, thus manifesting these values that are eminent in everyone. So this is called the blossoming of human excellence, which is Bala Vikas kind of program, which is taken it to the USA. So she also served as a national education coordinator for Sri Sathya Sai Organizations USA from 1993 to 2015. Welcome, Mrs. Berniece. The second panelist is Mrs. Geetha Ram. Mrs. Geetha Ram, I know everybody knows her, but it is my privilege to introduce her. She's born in a family of devotees who are first recognized Swami's divinity in 1943. You all should know that Swami Avatar declaration was in 1940. They were so fortunate in 3 years, going to Swami. So 4 generations of her family have remained and still serving Swami's lotus feet. Her father, Dr. Padmanabhan, a renowned dental surgeon, served Swami in various organization capacities for decades and well known as the person who walked behind Swami during the darshans in Whitefield, Brindavan. Mrs. Geetha Ram's mother, Kamala Padmanabhan, part of the original group that developed first Bala Vikas curriculum. This is very important. When Swami introduced the Bala Vikas, blossoming of the children, the character and the spiritual values, that is the time she was involved with that. And under the direction of Bhagavan himself, subsequently appointed by Bhagavan to be the SSC coordinator for the state of Karnataka in India, and which she served with a distinction for 25 years. Again, coming to Mrs. Geetha Ram, having born to such devoted parents, it's an incredible fortune of growing up in the shadow of our divine Lord since birth, enjoying and experiencing his divinity. During the frequent visits to their home, Swami used to come to their home. At the tender age of 15, Mrs. Geetha Ram was selected by Swami to be the SSC teacher to deliver the lectures under EHV program, which is Education in Human Values, to the high school teachers throughout the state of Karnataka. She had the rare privilege of serving Swami's scribe during the formulation of Bala Vikas curriculum, writing down the nectarine directions and words of Bhagavan himself as he developed this wonderful program. In 1978, after her marriage to Mr. Mohanram, Entire family got immigrated to USA, and staying in state of Maryland, and serving Sai Center of Bethesda at various capacities, along with twin sons Arun and Varun. 22 years she served as a SSC coordinator, vice president of the South Sri Sathya Sai South Bethesda Center, which is Joint Global Council, which is one of the oldest center in the East Coast. So for over past 25 years, at Swami's command and his blessing, and we all know that Mrs. Geetha Ram has been sharing her treasured experiences with our beloved Lord and with the devotees all over the world. Welcome, Mrs. Geetha Ram. The third panelist today is Mrs. Sumana Murali. Sister Sumana comes from again a family which is serving from 4 generations, loves and adores Swami in the family. Spent few years in the primary school at Prashant Nilayam when it first opened, and again 3 years of undergraduation she completed in Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning, Anantapur campus. Again, she is continuously a Balvikas alum and taken both course 1 and course 2 of SSEHV after coming to USA, and also former faculty member of the EHV program, and conducted SSEHV classes in the community for 2 years. Always been active member in the organization as a SSC teacher, a center educational coordinator, regional YA advisor, regional education coordinator, 24 years of involvement with the program. And Sister Sumana is also elementary public school classroom teacher. We all have 3 teachers here. For today, for the facilitator for this entire program is none other than our brother Axay Kalathia, who is the Zonal 1 chairman for Sathya Sai Global Council. I welcome you all for today's program. Over to brother Axay Kalathia.
Sairam, I offer myself at the dear, sweet lotus feet of our beloved Bhagwan. Sairam, everyone. This is a treat for all of us, and especially for me. As Balu mentioned, all 3 of our distinguished panelists, they've been immersed in the Sai fold for so many decades, well before I became aware of this avatar myself, and I would imagine most others of you listening in. So it's Swami's grace that we have the wisdom and perspective of 3 generations amongst us of wisdom on the panel today. Berniece provides that loving motherly wisdom and advice, as she is my mother's age. And Geetha provides that perspective of the young auntie, having the wisdom of experience along with the relatability of being a little bit closer in age. And then, of course, Sumana being a peer, giving that sisterly wisdom and advice. So we have wonderful perspectives, and we've had so many questions regarding this spiritual education program. Is it going to happen under Sri Sathya Sai Global Council? How is it going to look? What is it going to be comprised of? And so many of you have been asking these questions, and the panelists will certainly address all of these questions, and you will have a chance to ask some more questions later on during the talk that we may be able to address as well. So before we jump right in, we do want to maybe take a moment of silence. We did have a earthquake again in Haiti, and we have some storms coming on the way. So maybe we can all take a moment of silence for about 10, 15 seconds and say a group collective prayer for the world. And then when we close, we'll also close with some peace prayers at the end. Sairam. So let's jump right in and hear from our panel. The first question I'm going to bring up, it's addressed to all the panelists. Maybe Berniece can start, and then Geetha, and then Sumana. So can you please tell us how you were first introduced to Sathya Sai Baba's children's education program, the Bal Vikas program? So Bernice, can you start? How did you first get introduced to the program?
I sort of went into it a few minutes ago when I said I attended my first meeting of Baba at the bookstore meeting. I found out about Swami in February, and this was August. And Swami had sent those people that were talking, Swami had sent them home and told them to start children's classes. That was the first time I had heard that there were children's classes and that type of thing. So I met another lady there who we talked, and she found out she was a teacher, and she had a center in her home in Buena Park, California. So she invited my husband and I to come to the center, and she said, yes, let's talk about starting a children's class. And so we did. And basically, I think we started the first class in Southern California in my home. And well, it wasn't long after that, in 1979. I think 1980 is when we really began the first classes. So basically, that was the beginning. And we didn't know what to teach. We didn't know which direction to go. But we loved Swami, and he sent this message home to everybody: start children's classes. And so then Swami sent us an invitation to all the centers to come to the first teacher training in Prashanthi Nilayam in 1981. And so I attended that. That was my first teacher training. And basically, that was how I got started. I had the first lessons really under Swami and what we needed to do. And then he had another teacher training in 1983. And so I also attended that one. So I guess I had no choice. Like Swami said, this is your role to play. So I guess I'm playing the role that I'm supposed to play. So I don't guess I could say no at the times I wanted to, but I didn't.
So Bernice, while we were waiting for the meeting in the chat room, she was sharing a little bit more detail of the story. Bernice, others weren't able to hear that earlier story. Can you maybe go into that story of what Swami told you in the interview room and about the role and the tests? Can you share that?
Yes. Well, when I had been selected the National Education Coordinator, my son, who was a stuntman at Knott's Berry Farm and Universal Studios, was hurt during a performance, and he had a head injury. And so he was in a coma. And so I was devastated because we didn't know if he was going to make it, and I had just been selected the National Education Coordinator. So I said, I can't do it. I cannot do this work. And I told Dr. Goldstein, I said, I can't. He said, well, go see Swami. So I did go see Swami, and Swami called me in, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I had been selected the National Education Coordinator. He said, oh, she's national. And I said, no, Swami, I've been selected the National Education Coordinator, but I can't do the work. I said, I have a son who's in a coma, and I'm very occupied with him, and I really, at this point in time, I can't do the work. And he said, you must do the work. He said, this is a role that I have given you to play. And he put his thumb and his forefinger and his middle finger together and put it in the middle of my forehead. And he said, I'm blessing you, I'm directing you, have confidence. And so I knew then that I could not be the National Education Coordinator, because I had gone to say, I'm not going to do it. I just can't do it. But Swami then said, this is a role I have given you to play. And so he said to all of us, he said, you are all actors, and I have given you each a role to play. And he sat back in his chair and set himself up, and he said, and I'm the director. And so I knew then that whatever my circumstances, my personal circumstances were, that I had another role to play, and it was to work in the education field. And so I came home, and of course I became, the National Education Coordinator. And in that I began training teachers. I trained teachers in my home first, and first I became the Regional Education Coordinator for Southern California. And I did a lot of teacher trainings. And then I think Nadine Clagren was the first National Education Coordinator. And so within a year, I don't remember the timeline, but then Dr. Goldstein put me in the role as a National Education Coordinator. So that's when I started training teachers, not only in Southern California, but then I started traveling and training teachers all across the country. And so basically that's how it all started. And I don't think I could get out of the role to play. It was like he said, this is your role to play, and you must play it.
Right on, thank you. And And I was blessed in the late 90s and early 2000s to attend 3 of your teacher training sessions. So, and it was an amazing time. So, Geetha, can you share with us how you were first exposed to Baba's program?
When I was exposed to the Balavikas, there was no program actually. If I have a little time, I can kind of tell you this really interesting story. Sairam to all of you over there. Berniece, hello. And
Sairam.
Right. Actually, I think in 1968, and I was a kid, and I was there in Brindavan with a whole bunch of people. We were all sitting in the old Brindavan. I'm sure you've all seen videos, the old bungalow of Brindavan. And Swami used to spend a lot of time in Brindavan in those days because the college was being set up, the first Arts and Science College in Bangalore. So he used to spend a lot of time. And one particular evening, you know, my mother and some other ladies and myself, we were all waiting outside while my father, Dr. Padmanabhan, and some of the other people, the whole Sai organization was just starting, and the concept of the Sathya Sai Seva organizations, everything Swami was discussing every day, what name to give the organization, how would it be structured. So it was just in the very, very beginning of the organization. And at that time, all these ladies were inside, and my father and some other men were inside discussing with Swami how to go about this whole thing Swami was telling them. When suddenly Swami came outside, all these ladies, a few ladies were sitting and just chatting and waiting for the men to come out. This was after evening darshan, and Swami just called all these ladies, and I was there. I kind of tagged along, 12, 13 years old. And Swami said, what are you ladies all doing, you know, at home? Some of them were homemakers. So they were not professionals or anything. We are talking about 1968 in India, in Bangalore. And he said, you know, instead of wasting a whole lot of time, just wasting your time chit-chatting, why don't you gather a few children in your neighborhood and start teaching some good values and some devotional songs and stories? And all of these women who were just sitting and chatting generally about their mundane lives were a little taken aback. But in this group of ladies, I really have to remember some of these ladies today. Most of them are gone, but they were like the pioneers of the whole program to follow Swami's directive of how to go about it. And some of them were like ordinary ladies, like my mother. She was just a high school graduate, married at the age of 15, became a devotee in 1944 when she got married. So that was my mother. But there were people like Mrs. Shanta Divakar, who was a very well-known educationalist in Bangalore. And she was the head of one of the large women's colleges. And there was Mrs. Vimala Sheshadri, I think she was a lawyer. And there was, of course, Dr. Professor Gokak, who was the Vice Chancellor of the Bangalore University, which had thousands of students and teachers under him. Then there was also Professor Rajaratnam, who was a great professor and a poet, and who had converted to Buddhism, by the way, also, who had done his whole PhD thesis on Buddhism, though born as a Hindu. And then there was Mrs. Usha Pillai, who owned a school from nursery all the way up to 12th grade. So she was the principal and owner of a very well-known Montessori school in Bangalore. There was Mrs. Usha Bidu, there was Kamala Padmanabhan, my mother, there was Mrs. Saraswati Natarajan, who was a freedom fighter, who had worked for women's freedom. So these were the 9 people, and of course, Professor Kasturi. So Swami just called these 9 people and said, what are you all doing? Just chit-chatting over here in the evening. Gather a few children in your neighborhood and start teaching them some good values and songs and stories. And these ladies said, what should we teach them? And Swami said, what do you mean, what should you teach them? You're all mothers, you're all sisters, you're aunts. You all have had children in your families, whether it's nieces or nephews. You've all told stories. The first thing to do is, if you want to attract a child, start telling them stories. And then teach them some good devotional singing. Teach them some prayers. And so this is how the whole idea of and there was no name, there was no Balavikas name. He said, just gather the children and do it. And I want to make an important point here. At that time, there were not that many devotees either. So the children that my mother collected in my neighborhood were all basically my friends. My mother said, just bring all your friends to class. We'll do it on a Saturday. So all my friends were like, oh, come on. My mother was a very good storyteller. So they all wanted to come and listen to her. So the same thing happened in different parts of Bangalore. And they all started to gather together some children. And again, there were no groups. There was no group 1, group 2, group 3, 4. There was a mixed group of children from the age of 5 or 6 all the way to 12 or 13 or 14, because it was still a very informal program. And it started that way. And by 69, it started to get more formalized, because the Sathya Sai Seva Samitis in India started to get formalized. And the Bal Vikas program started to get formalized. And it started in Mumbai, where Swami made under the very able leadership of Mrs. Sarla Shaw. And it started to get a kind of a format. And for a couple of years, I think for 2 or 3 years, it was actually known as Bala Vihar. And then Swami changed the name to Bala Vikas, because he said Vihar is somewhere where you go for entertainment, like a park or something. But the Bala Vikas program is to blossom the child's character. So let's call it Vikas, something that blossoms, the character blossoms. So slowly I have seen it evolve from the gates of Vrindavan all the way up to now, where it has just spread all over the world. And thank you for asking me that question, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to remember those wonderful, wonderful ladies under whom I kind of listened to their stories, learned from them. Then I got catapulted into being a Balavikas Guru at the age of actually 14 and a half. I was in 8th grade. And the Karnataka State Sai Centers needed training when the centers began to form. So Swami made my mother the state coordinator for Balavikas, and just told me, you do the class. And I was 14 and a half. The children in the class were all my friends. So that's how I started way back. Sairam.
Beautiful.
Sairam, wonderful. Wonderful to hear that story. And it's amazing how even back then you realize it's the simplicity of the values and the motherly love. And I think those are things that should never be lost in any of these programs. So Sumana, can you also share with us how you were introduced?
Sairam to all of you, Sairam to all the elders, brothers, sisters. First of all, I want to offer this entire conversation and everything I have to say at the lotus feet of our most beloved Bhagavan. And I want to offer our collective gratitude to Swami for giving us this privilege of sitting and having this conversation where we're all hale and healthy. There are many families that have lost their loved ones during this pandemic. So to have this privilege of talking about this divine program is certainly a blessing. So my grandparents came into Swami's fold long ago. And so I was born, people always ask me, when were you introduced to Swami? Or when did Swami come into your life? I said, Swami was always in my life. I was introduced to him, So having been born in a family that worshipped Swami as God, I was the first of 3 children. So I am the first of 3 children. So I'm the one, everything was tried on as an older child. And Swami had just started the primary school. And I had the blessing and privilege of being at that school for the first 3-4 years of my life. And I was so homesick, I cried my way back home. I was so homesick, I would cry. Every single day, I would cry. And I remember Swami coming and asking me why I am crying and wiping my tears. So now when I found myself back home in Chennai, avoiding Balvikas was not an option. So that was a class I had to go to every Sunday. And I have to say I was a very reluctant student. I wouldn't want to go only because of one reason, because my favorite show on TV would come exactly at the same time of class. And I had to miss it every single week in order to be at class. So I attended Bal Vikas in Chennai, and my teacher, I have such fond memories of him. He would come in, he would teach group 1, and he would come back down from upstairs, and that's the house where Swami used to stay when he used to come to Chennai. He used to stay upstairs. So Swami's room was tucked in. There was a little living room, and that's where probably where Swami would have interviews, but our class was held there. So our guru would come, he would teach group 1, he would come back down to the front porch and sit there and wait for group 2. When group 2 came along, he would go up, take group 2, come back down, take a break before group 3 came along. There were only 3 groups, and then he would do group 3 and come back. So I often think that's how I got introduced to Bal Vikas, and it's been many years. I am still teaching, I'm coordinating, and many of my students have come and gone, married. So I often wonder who the student really is. And I met my Bal Vikas guru, teacher, 4 years ago, and he's still teaching in his late 80s and 90s. So that's how I came into SSE, Bal Vikas.
Sweet.
Very nice.
Right, wonderful, wonderful. Let's go on to another question. This is a fundamental question. What is the purpose of this program? What's the purpose of the program? And what is the primary message or teaching that's to be conveyed in this program? So Berniece, do you want to start this one as well?
Well, I think it's very simple, that we are all God. There's no difference. We come from God, we are God. And so I think that's what Swami's trying to tell us. Look, you are God. And to me, that's, because everything that we're taught and the values and all, it's just truth. It's God. And so to me, I think it's very simple, that basically it's a program to teach us who we are and that we are God.
Beautiful, beautiful. Geetha?
And Berniece is totally right. That being the primer, which is the reason why the name Vikas was given, the blossoming of that divinity within us, which already exists. Unfortunately, we've forgotten it. Swami says, the ash covers the beautiful flame in the coal, and we're all covered with all these worldly problems and desires. And so to ignite that little flame, that was one thing. And I remember actually in one of the earlier, when Sumana was kind enough to say, of course, and when the first curriculum was being written, when it was talked about, how should we make a textbook? How should we do this curriculum? Swami actually took a very, very personal interest in what is to be included in this curriculum, because this was such a noble mission to really, and that too, to teach it to children who are going to become future citizens of this world, wherever they go. So it was such a serious and such an important part of the avataric mission that Swami himself sat down and actually planned out everything that he wanted included into this Bal Vikas program. It was called Bal Vikas because the beginnings were in India, but later on we see that it spread all over the world. But the idea never changed. The idea was the blossoming of the divinity within. And one of the important things, and luckily for me, I mentioned all those ladies' names. Swami would call them every evening, and this was for almost 6 months. Every evening or twice a week, he would call and he would go through the curriculum and what he wanted included. And Dr. Gokok, who was the vice chancellor, would be a part of it and would tell Swami of the educational part of it, Dr. Rajaratnam. And I was really fortunate because I used to just tag along with my mother, and I was about 15 years old. And Swami asked me to become the scribe. He said, whatever we discuss, just write it down, because everybody will be talking and nobody will write down. And then when they get home, they'll forget what we talked about. So I would sit next to Swami's chair and write down every word that Swami said or Dr. Gokok said, and then it was all compiled and made into a format. And during one of these conversations, Swami actually sang a beautiful song, which he said should be one of the things that every child should grow up with. And the stanza, one of the stanzas was in Telugu, and I'll translate it. Pashvulu vereina palukote. Though the cows look different in different countries, the sizes and the colors are different. The color of the milk is that of purity. So that is one of the things that we should teach children. We may all come from various languages, places, countries, but the purity of heart is what is to be cultivated so that the human being grows up to be a pure human being. Then he said, Urulu veraina unaki okate. That means the clouds may be different colors, different sizes. One day looks puffy, one day looks like a rain-filled cloud. But the source of that cloud is the same, and that is the beautiful, wide, expansive ocean. And from there, the clouds rise. So our hearts should become as expansive as that beautiful ocean that is there all over the world. And not only that, he said, the clouds come out of the source, but it again rains back, and the rains come. The source and the end result is the same. You come from the divine, you go back to the divine. So, Urulu veraina uniki okate, dikkulu veraina divyatvamu okate ani bodhinchi Mamugaidana Sai Ramam, he said. Dikkulu veraina, the directions may be different. Dikkulu veraina, divyatvamu. You may take many different paths. You may be a Christian, you may be a Hindu, you may be a Sikh, you may be a Jewish person. But the divyatvamu, the divine entity is the same. Just the paths are different, but the goal is the same. Okate ani bodhinchi mamugaigana sai. He says, this is what is the message of Sai. That was the song that Swami sang, and this was one of the stanzas. And he said that this is a very important part of the Bala Vikas program. So the directions may be different, the paths, religions, languages may be different, but the ultimate goal is to realize the divinity within you. To go back to the source, like the clouds. You come from the source, you go back to the divine source again. That is what the purpose of human life is. And maybe all the cows and everything may be different, but the purity and the color of the milk is the same. So we all become pure human beings to realize that divinity. So that was how Swami wanted to make it a part of the Bala Vikas program. And it has forever stayed in my mind, actually.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Sairam, beautiful. That unity and diversity and the beautiful way that he has been conveying it, and that message has never changed. Sumana, how about you?
Oh, I cannot even add anything more. He says, if you really think about what Auntie Berniece and Geetha Auntie said, is divinity is a standard package God gives us, right? We're all born divine. It's a premium package, I should say. We come with that. But Swami says, in order to understand the divine nature, I was thinking of the 1981 teacher training that Berniece attended, where Swami says, in order to understand the divine nature, you have to develop your character. And you develop your character through these Bala Vikas classes. Children develop it by listening to stories, by playing games, by being kind, by doing service, by engaging in society. I'm a little bit of a nerd and I do a bit of reading. And last summer when I was reading, I came across studies that actually show today that when a child is born, every faculty of the child is developing. The emotional faculty is developing, the physical body of the child is developing, the intellect is developing, the social aspect is developing. But the only part that comes completely developed in a child is the spiritual part of the child. And studies show that when you nurture that spiritual part of a child for the first 2 decades of a child's life, Stop and think about how long Swami's Bal Vikas program is. I'm talking about today's studies. When that spiritual part of a child is nurtured for the first 2 decades of a child's life, that child grows and blossoms into a good human being that's a good citizen who has a healthy mental life that serves his home and serves his community. So that very purpose of Bal Vikas that Swami has is to realize that we're divine. He says you do it by developing good character. And he says that the way to do it is he defines character, and he defines it so simply. And this is why I love what Swami says, because it's so simple. He says the way you develop good character, he defines it in that discourse as you make sure no bad thoughts enter your mind. And you make sure that those thoughts are put into action. So you develop good thoughts and you put them into action. And he's so kind and he's so practical. And he says, if you have faulty thoughts, you will have, because we are human. You will have faulty ideas, you'll have faulty thoughts. He says, make sure it doesn't come again in your mind. Don't have the same bad thought over and over. It's okay to have a new one, but not the same thing. But you develop good thoughts and you practice them. That's the very essence of this program. And when you really look at it, it's beyond culture, it's beyond religion, and it's literally applicable to every single child around the world.
And that's the truth.
Geetha, I want to ask a follow-up question to you. If you could maybe give a little bit more detail on some of the training process, how it started, how it spread in India, what were the key points Swami wanted emphasized?
Yeah, sure. It fell on these few people who started those first classes. The beginning, it kind of, even though it became formalized, in 1968-69 time frame, there were no teachers really. They were all just homemakers who gathered children. They were again not devotee children, just neighborhood children, and they had to come up with an idea of a training, how to go about doing the actual formal training. And I think they all sat down, and with Swami's guidance again, he started to say, these are some of the things that we should tell teachers, gurus, as he called them, not even teachers, because he said teachers just pass on the information, but the guru tries to live what he teaches or she teaches. So he was very sure that everybody should be called gurus. And the way the training started, I remember with my mother when she was made the state coordinator, would go from small towns in India to gather. And Swami in the beginning had said that the women would be very, very well qualified to do this, because the nurturing quality comes very easily to women because they are mothers, sisters, they are sensitive to the children's needs. So it started out with the women being the teachers, and of course later on the men joined in as well. So I remember how my mother asked Swami when he was visiting one of, to our house on one of the times at dinner time, Swami, what is the kind of training that we should give? What should the person be? What should they already know to even take the training? Should they be teachers? Who should they be? And Swami gave a beautiful, and I'm sure you've all heard him in various discourses singing, Satya Dharmamu Shanti Premalato Nitya Jivana Yatra Saginchu. So he said, Satya Dharma Shanti and Prema. Satya Dharma Shanti Premalato, with these four qualities, Nitya Jivana Yatra Saginchu, your everyday life, which is a journey. If you are living your life with truth, with love, and right conduct, and prema, with love, if all these four qualities and the sense of being non-violent, if people are living a life in their everyday life, they are the ones qualified to then teach others. So in your everyday life, if you're trying to practice truth, if you're trying to practice right conduct, if you're trying to be peaceful with everybody and get along with everybody and living lovingly with everybody and not harming anybody, that is the primary requirement for a person to become a guru. So that was very simple. So we had to all introspect. Where is it that we love to teach, but where do I have to change? What value do I have to increase within myself if I should take on the noble task of becoming a guru to an innocent child? So that's how Swami said, if somebody wants to teach an innocent child, the qualities, these are required. That's all. Later on, the other ideas and what story to tell and which prayer to teach and which song to choose, those are all external things. But the inner quality of loving nature, that should be cultivated, and such people should volunteer to become. So that's how he said, and thus they started to go, and he said women are very well qualified, he said in the beginning, to start out with. So I remember, do I have time to narrate this little story, or should I stop at this point and I can bring it up at some other time?
No, please keep the stories coming.
Okay, because this is an interesting incident, and the reason I thought of it just now was it was not easy in those days of 60s in India to go to these small towns around Bangalore, because in Bangalore, these 9 people had started to do it, within their schools. I said Usha Pillai had a school and Mrs. Shanta Divakar was a principal. So they started to do it within that environment. But Swami wanted it to go out into the smaller towns, into the areas where people didn't have this much accessibility to come to Vrindavan, or they were not even devotees. But small centers had started all over, sprouted all over the state of Karnataka. So he asked my mother to go to a place called Bidar. That's a small town in Karnataka, way northern Karnataka. It was a small town, very, very hot place. And, the letters would take 10 days to even reach the person. And a small center, a couple of centers had started there. There was a district president who was taking care of small Sai centers there, which had started. And Swami told my mother to go there and train some of these. And there were several such small places. But the problem in India in those days, and again, I don't think many of the listeners were even born, at that time. And if you go back in time to India, women did not come, especially in small towns, did not come out so independently to do anything. They lived in joint families with in-laws. It wasn't so easy for them to come out. So Swami, who was always the master psychologist, told my mother, you first go to the Sai Center and first talk to the men. You convince them as to what this beautiful Bala Vikas program is. And then the men will say, but how can we teach? We are all so busy. How can we teach? And you say, no, your wife would be very capable, because see, she's already teaching her children at home. Why don't you encourage your wife to come? And so literally my mother and some of these ladies would go meet the men in these small towns, talk to them, tell them what the program was and how beautiful it is and how wonderful their children would grow up in a world which has no differences, and then encourage them to send their wives to take the training. So it was like a 3-step program, even to start the training for the teachers. So in this particular place called Bidar, and the reason I'm bringing this up is, once we agree to take on to do Swami's work, Swami is always behind us. If we do it with a satsankalpa, if we are doing it for the right reasons and with a good feeling in our heart that we want to do the right thing, if that is the motivation, then Swami is behind us. So on this particular trip to Bidar, it was a long bus ride of about 13 hours from Bangalore to this place. It was a rickety old government bus, and they had to go up and down. And Bidar is a very, very, very hot place also. It's very hot. So these 3 ladies, my mother, one lady called Mrs. Madiman, and another lady called Sunandamma, all of these 3 people decided to go. My mother had written to the district president saying, we will be coming on such and such a day. We will talk to the men. We will try to do a minimum training for the ladies who volunteer. She got a reply. My mother was very organized, saying, yes, please come. We will look after you. Remember again, 1969, no Marriotts, no hotels in India in these small towns. You had to go and stay in the devotee homes. There were no hotels in these small towns. And first of all, it was quite an amazing sight for them to see 3 women come in this bus to do this. So my mother wrote this and they arrived in Bidar. And it arrived at about 4:30 in the evening. And when they arrived there, these men, this district president and the vice president were supposed to meet them. They had not come to the bus stand. They don't know where. From this Bidar bus station, they have to go an interior of 25 kilometers to the village. And they were supposed to come and take them. Nobody was there. They thought, okay, they must be delayed. They waited and they waited. 4:30, 5:30, 6:30, 7:30, it started to get dark. Nobody has come to pick them up. So they have left Bangalore in the morning at 6:30. At 7 o'clock, they've had whatever little food they had brought with them. And there was nothing there in the bus station except one little shop which was selling bananas. And they began to wonder what to do. And you will understand, Dr. Axay being a doctor, this lady, Mrs. Madiman, was in her late 60s, was a diabetic. Her sugar was dropping, no food, nothing to drink. And they really started to worry, what shall we do? Where to stay? It is a bus stand, an open air bus stand. If they stayed there that night with nobody coming, they literally have to sleep on the floor under a tree with no sheets. They were supposed to. So they were sitting there and they were wondering what to do. And this lady started to say, Mrs. Padmanabhan, are you sure Swami told you to do the training? You see, whenever we are faced with difficulties, we start questioning everybody around us and their integrity also. So then they started to ask my mother, are you sure you wrote to the district president? Did you get a reply? Well, my mother always used to go everywhere with her copy. See, I got the letter there. So I don't know what happened. They're supposed to receive us. Oh, then what are we going to do? There is no to return. Let us return to Bangalore. My mother thinks there is no bus, only one bus in 24 hours. The next bus is tomorrow morning at 6:30 a.m. What shall we do? What shall we do? So we have a quotation in Kannada, Sankata Bandare Venkataramana. When you are in trouble, think of God. At other times, we think we are only doing everything. But when we are in trouble, we think of God. So they said we have to better start thinking of Swami. So they sat under that tree of the bus stand was a tree, by the way. So they sat under the tree and they started to repeat Sathya Sai 108 names. And as they are repeating the names, another bus came from somewhere else and one gentleman got out. And he was on the other side of the street. And I think he got out and he turned around because he suddenly heard some chanting going on. And as he came closer to the tree, he sees it's by now 8 o'clock in the night, dark. No lights. It's a village, remember. No lights. I don't think the people listening can even imagine to such situations. I have gone to such training camps, but it is difficult when we live in a Western world to even imagine such a situation. So they are sitting there. And he came close by and he said, who is this Amma? They are chanting Sathya Sai Ashtotram. So the 108 names of Sathya Sai. And he saw my mother and he recognized her and he said, Mrs. Padma Kamalamma, what are you doing here? Why are you sitting under a tree and chanting Swami's name? And my mother said, I don't know, you have come. His name was Mr. Krishnamurthy. He was one of the teachers in the school in Alike, in Mangalore. That is a Mangalore district, is another part of Karnataka. He was there. She said, look, this has happened to us. We don't know where to go. So this gentleman said, I just have an acquaintance here who owns a grocery store. That is somewhere in that small village. Let me go and see if he can accommodate you 3 ladies. How can you sleep under the tree? No. Then he was very kind. He said, have you eaten anything? They said, we ate our lunch at 12:30 in the bus. There is nothing else here. There is no shop. So he went to a nearby shop and got them some bananas that was there and gave it to them. And he said, you please wait under the tree. Then after almost 1 hour, you have to walk everywhere, no vehicles. He came back with a key and he said, if we walk about half a kilometer, there is a warehouse, I believe, where this grocery store man stores his groceries. He said, if you don't mind sleeping with the rice and the wheat and the ragi and whatever groceries that he has stored, you can use that room, but it will give you a little privacy to sleep. At least you are not in the street. And there is some bathroom outside you can use. You can imagine these ladies have not even used the bathroom since they have left their town in Bangalore. These are all older ladies, especially those two other ladies. So they said, thank God they followed him there. And he moved some of those big gunny bags of groceries, the rice and all that, made some space. And he said, you wait there. I will see if I can find a farmer to bring some milk. You people eat these bananas and I'll get you some milk. Then they said, why are you here, first of all, this school teacher from Alike? And how come you have come like this? Swami only has sent you. He said, definitely Swami has sent me, Amma, because I was supposed to get down from the bus 6 bus stops before. But I fell asleep in my bus. And I woke up here, so I got out thinking I'll find that grocery, my friend, and stay there in the night and go back the next 6 bus stops tomorrow morning, when I heard Sathya Sai 108 meals. So they said, okay, very good. Thank God you went to sleep. Whatever you did, you are helping us. So he went and then brought them some milk and all that. And he went and asked that grocery fellow, can you give a bed sheet or something? They have to sleep on the hard concrete floors, these ladies. So they slept there. They used the bathroom. And he said, I will sleep outside. As a man, you people, ladies, you use. Next day morning, by the time, they got ready with their suitcase, they were thinking we better find the bus to go back to Bangalore. For some reason, the district president didn't come. Suddenly, they heard outside, Sai Ram, Sai Ram being shouted. So they went out. Those village people who were supposed to come and pick them up had arrived in the bullock cart. And they are shouting Sai Ram, because they don't know where these ladies are. Whether they have gone back. So to attract them, they are going around the village shouting Sai Ram. So these 3 ladies came out. They fell at their feet and said, please forgive us. We didn't know. Our district president, his mother passed away in Chennai. And he went there. He sent us a telegram saying that please pick up these ladies who have come to give the training. But the telegram came this morning. The telegram which was sent 4 days ago. We have come from our village. Please come, please come. We are so sorry. They apologized. And they said the program starts at 10:30. Swami is very particular about punctuality. It's about 7:30 in the morning. They got into the bullock cart, went to the village, quickly took their showers in the devotee's house, started the program on time at 10:30 with the housewives of that village, of the many people there. And they started. And when they finished the training and came back to Bangalore, in Vrindavan, I remember Swami called all of the other trainers, teachers who were there together. And they said, I had to make that poor 6 bus stops so that he could help Kamalamma and the other 2 gurus to train the teachers. So the original training program started like that. But because they did it with devotion, Swami was ready to send any type of help that they needed. So anybody who needs to train anybody, Sumana, you are now in that position. Swami will send you the right people. Sai Ram.
Oh, I love that story.
Thank
Beautiful, beautiful story. It reminds me how Swami will test us. Everything's under his control, and he'll test us. And the easy way to pass the test is to fall at his feet and pray his name. Yes. So a pause here. I just want to remind those of you listening, if you have any questions, please do send them into the administrator email that was shared earlier in the program. And I want to move over to Berniece. Berniece, you grew up in the Christian faith, a fundamentalist Christian home.
Right.
What did you think about the program as far as its applicability, its universality? And how did your faith in Swami help you reconcile your upbringing with the message of the program?
Well, Jesus' teachings and Swami's teachings are very similar, of course. The difference is that the Christians accept Jesus as their savior, and he's the only way. There is not another way. And so it took me a little while to grasp that, because I wanted to make sure that Jesus wasn't the only way. But Jesus' way is the only way, but it's Swami's way and it's truth. It's a way of, to me, it was so wonderful to go to Swami and to sit with a Buddhist on one side of you and a Hindu on the other side of you. And maybe I remember that there was one of my trips, there was a priest from the Vatican that was there. And he'd heard about Swami. And when later I went back and he had gone back to the Vatican. And when they found out where he had been, they kicked him out. They said he couldn't come back to the Vatican. So, I realized how narrow many of the religions are, that, the only way but you see, Jesus' way and Swami's way was the same. I mean, it wasn't that it was about, but of course we had rituals, and baptism was a big ritual for the Christians. And so with Swami, baptism wasn't that important, but it just, I had a little trouble in the beginning, but I loved Swami so much, and I knew that what he was teaching was true and that it was the truth. But I have to say that I had a bridge from my Christianity to Swami, and it was Edgar Cayce. Now, Edgar Cayce was a famous American psychic. I don't know whether you ever heard of him or not, but he was a famous American in the 40s. And so I had not heard of him, but after I'd heard about Swami, I was watching TV one day, and they had Edgar Cayce's son was on, and he was talking about what it was like when his father people would come and he'd give readings and that. And I had never heard of Edgar Cayce. And he said there was a book about There Is a River by Thomas Segru. And I went out that day and I bought that book. Edgar Cayce came from the same church I did, and he had the same birthday as me. That was my bridge from my Christianity to Swami. But isn't that, I mean, he had the same religion, he went to the same church, and then they had the same birthday. To me, that was so Swami. I mean, it was just like, yeah, right on. It can't get much better than that, I'll tell you.
Beautiful. Berniece, can you talk a little bit about what the program looked like when you first brought it back and overseas, and what kind of children were you teaching in the U.S., and then how did it develop in the Western countries?
Axay, before Berniece says something, can I just add to something that Berniece just said? I know that the Bal Vikas program started in India, but I just want to make one point that even though I was born in the Sanatana Dharma, the Hindu way of life, when my grandfather and my grandfather's brother and my parents went, it was a very narrow idea of Sanatana Dharma that they had grown up with, which was, the ritualistic way. This is the way to go about it. And they didn't have this broader vision of Swami. So as far as my families, the 8 or 10 families who went there, they were looking for more than that narrow idea of Hinduism that they were practicing. Because if they just wanted to be Hindus, there were innumerable opportunities to go to any temple and practice it. But Swami's message of universality was what attracted them, actually. So they actually kind of broadened their vision from that narrow Hindu outlook to the real Sanatana Dharma, which is a very broader outlook of divinity within you, the Atma Swarupa within you. So my family, so I grew up with this very wide idea that Hinduism was not narrow and all of the religions were the same thing. So I just wanted to make the point that the people who went to Swami in the early 40s and 50s, even though they grew up in Hindu families, which was a narrow viewpoint at that time, wanted something broader. And Swami gave that, that broad vision of acceptance of everybody and everything. So it was not only with the Christianity, but even with the Hindus, when they went to Swami, they developed that broader vision. I just wanted to make that point, but please do go ahead, Berniece, about how it came to the US that he was asking.
Well, basically, of course, Edgar Cayce talked about reincarnation and how, you have different lifetimes. And that made sense to me. because I had never, reincarnation was like it was a fairy tale or something like that. But all of a sudden, it was making sense to me. Of course, it's and he would, every time he gave a reading, he would tell about, well, you're having this problem because in this past life you did this, 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 and so it just made so much. But when my mother was dying, Swami came into my life before mother passed away, and she sent a handkerchief once to be blessed. And I said, what, Mother, why don't you send your wedding ring or something that you keep on your body? No, she wanted to send this handkerchief. So I took the handkerchief, and one day in darshan, I held the handkerchief out. I had a front row seat, and I held the handkerchief in my hand. I said, Swami, would you bless? And he picked that handkerchief out, and he rolled it in his hands like this. And then he put it back in my hand, and he slapped it. I bless. So I came home and told Mother, boy, your handkerchief has really been blessed. And she took it and kissed it. So when she passed away, I wondered where that handkerchief was, And so we went, when we were going through her thing, Mother was one of these people who put on an apron every day. And in that apron pocket was that handkerchief. So she carried it with her every day. But
beautiful. Can any of the panelists, anything else you want to share regarding the relevancy of Swami's program for all faiths and cultures? Any other comments on that?
Sure. Swami always talks about, Swami's take on religion is so beautiful because anything that he says is never at surface level. It's always like one step higher. And he says the essence of all religions is love. That once you go beyond the ritual part of it, Geetha Auntie was talking about how Orthodox Hindus who wanted to expand their view of life and view on God actually took to Swami, or how Berniece from the Christian faith and going to church and taking Sunday school saw how universal Swami's message was. So once you go beyond that day-to-day rituals and you expand to what is called Sanatana Dharma, or very narrowly interpreted as Hinduism, then everything is based on love. And Swami actually says, there is no such person called an atheist. If you believe in love, that is good. If you are someone who believes in the magic of love changing your life and your fellow being's life, then you can attain liberation just as much as the yogi in the Himalayas. There is no difference between the two. If you're able to serve your fellow man without hurting them, then you are just as much qualified for liberation as the Catholic priest. It doesn't matter. So religion is only a path, but if it doesn't lead you to a higher goal, he actually says somewhere that religion is often used as a pretext for promoting differences and conflicts. But if you go beyond that, and he very clearly talks about children, and he says, anything about, and I'm quoting Swami, anything about a religion or aspects of a religion should not be taught to children in a manner which will create contradictions in their minds. He says we should not have hatred for any religion. All religions only teach how we can go closer to God. One should not take the attitude that one religion is better and another one smaller. One should not make such comparisons. It is the equality of all the religions and the acceptance of the main principles of all religions is the essence of Sai's ideals. And this program is based on those ideals. And we're all familiar with the quote, right? There is only one religion, the religion of love. There is only one caste, the caste of humanity. There's only one language, the language of the heart. There's only one God. He's omnipresent. And that one God is within all of us in the form of love.
Axay, Swami also says, in the statement, God is nowhere. If you just move the W from where to
now
the no,
here.
it becomes God is now here. And the W stands for wisdom, which is what we want to give our children. The wisdom of divinity within them. Once they have that wisdom, it doesn't matter where you're from, God is now here. Wherever you are, it doesn't matter, isn't it?
Beautiful, beautiful. It reminds me that that what you're all saying. It seems that one of the goals of this program and the goals of why the avatar came is to get us all to understand that the essence of every religion is the same. And that's what Sai's message is. It's at the heart of every religion, and anything else is just a misunderstanding of your own religion. Because the essence of every religion is the exact same message, and that's Swami's message. So we only have, about a little less than half an hour left to go. And so I want to, maybe move forward with some more nitty-gritty questions. And I just want to remind everyone, if they do want to send a question, the email address is admin, ADMIN, at SSSGC-USA.org. So how about Geetha and Berniece? Can you talk a little bit about the manual and how it started and how Swami helped guide the teacher training manual?
Well, when I went after Jay's accident, and I said I couldn't, do this role anymore. And so when Swami said, "This is your role to play, you must do it," I said, "Well, Swami, I'm working on the teacher's manual," and he said, "Your teachers, you must finish the teacher's manual." And so he said he'd guide us. So when I came back, I went to my center, and I was telling the center, of course, my interview with Swami, and Swami said, "No, you go back and you finish the manual." He said, "Finish the manual." So I'm sitting there, and so at the end of my talk at the center, a lady by the name of Corinne Cody comes up to me, and she says, "Berniece, would you like my resume?" And I thought, resume? I mean, in a Sai organization, we don't talk about resumes. But she said that I'm a professional editor, and that I have written California State textbooks, and I would be happy to help you. She was in my center, this gal, and so I had a lot of people that come to my home, and we did a lot of research. I got as many quotes as I could on education, and I researched for about a year, getting quotes and for the manual, because I knew that the manual had to be full of quotes. And so there were about 5 of us here in Southern California that would meet regularly in the book center. And so one day in the book center, Bob Bazzani was there, and he said, "Are you about to finish this manual?" I said, "Well, we still have a lot of quotes that we need to do, but we're getting close." So he said, "I want you to go to my cabin up in the mountains and work this weekend, and just work on the manual." So we did. He had a beautiful little cabin up at Lake Arrowhead. And so we took the Sathya Sai Speaks, because all of the and so I told Corinne what section I wanted in, that it was very, we needed a section for parents. We needed to go in depth with the values and what they mean, and with Swami's quotes. And so I gave her an idea of what all we needed to put in this manual. So we sat down all that weekend and went through and came up with all, and it was so beautiful, because sometimes someone said, "Well, I need a quote on righteousness or love," and somebody said, "I'm just reading it right now." And it was so beautiful, because it just seemed to, to all come together. So anyway, we worked very hard that weekend. So we got it put together, and Corinne put it into a professional way, with all the way the manual was put together by a professional editor. I mean, she really knew how to put it together. And so we gave it to Bob, and Bob took the manual to Swami, and Swami took it, and he took the EHV manual also, which the girls in New York had written. So Swami took the EHV manual, and he put it in the floor. Then he took the SSE manual, and he went through it page by page by page. And then he handed it back to Bob, and he said, "This is a very important book. Print it." And so Bob came home, and he said, "This is what Swami said." So he said, we're going to print it, send it to the printers. And so my first workshop was in San Francisco, and they were delivered, those books were delivered at the bookstore that afternoon. And I got on the airplane that night and took the first group of the manuals to San Francisco. And from then on, the manual was in. But it was, Swami just said, this is a very important book, printed. But it was put together, we all worked together for that whole weekend. It's funny how Bob Bazzani was part of it. We went to his cabin and we all of us worked tirelessly all weekend on getting the quotes, and Corinne, being the professional editor, she knew how to put it into a good form. And so I have to give a lot of credit to Corinne for making it workable so that we could use it as a manual, a training manual. So like Swami said, it's a very important book. And so I tell everybody, they put it on the internet, but I said, really, they need that manual in front of them. It needs to be something not on the computer, but something that they can hold and something they can turn the pages. And so that's what I recommend when they do teacher trainings, to have the manuals right there that they can hold and turn the pages and go through it. So
beautiful. Geetha, any comments on the manual itself, or any other experience with that?
Yeah. I mean, the Indian part of it, I remember that I think it was in 1971. The Bal Vihar was named as Bal Vikas, and then they formulated all the rules and the regulations of how to run the class, what format. And I think the first magazine, the Bal Vikas magazine in India, was started in 71. And in the Rajmundry conference, I think 72, 73, I think it's more 73, the 3-step curriculum was prepared, I remember, just to go back a little bit. And then in the third All India conference, I think 1975, I would say, or 74, the group 3 syllabus was prepared, and then it went out to all of the other countries as a thing. But I have a very nice memory of Bernice's manual because I know that she and I would talk a lot, and a lot of the times she would say, oh, I'm looking for this parenting quote. And, there's so many of these discourses. And somehow I would remember the Rajmundry discourse or the World Conference discourse. And I say, I think it's in the Sathya Sai Speaks, or because there was no Radio Sai at that time, actually. So we would both kind of look through it. And then, of course, Bernice, I mean, the amount of work that she did, I can never forget. She read, I think, pages and pages of the Sathya Sai Speaks, and I would come up with some quote and she would look for all the references, because I would just remember, I think Swami said this in the Rajmundry discourse or the Prashanti Nilayam conference or something like that, and she would look it up, and she really worked very hard on that manual with so much of love, and she put in a lot of effort and a lot of research. And I remember that when she was in Prashanti Nilayam once, she and I were sitting next to each other. I didn't have much to do with it other than, providing her with some quotes, which she would recheck and find the correct source and all that, because I couldn't remember the dates. And she was sitting next to me, and Swami happened to call me for an interview, and she had the draft of it. Do you remember? And she just said, oh, he's calling you, and just take it and give it to him. And I said, no, I'm scared to take what you have written with so much of effort. He should be really calling you. And she said, no, I'm going to be leaving tomorrow. I don't know if he'll see it or not. You just take it. And she gave me one of the draft copies that she had. And I took it in, actually quite petrified what Swami would say, because this had nothing to do with me other than, a little bit of discussion with her. And I walked in with this huge manual with all the sheets in. And Swami said, what is this you're carrying? And I said, Swami, please call Berniece Mead. She's sitting outside. She wrote the book, this manual. And he said she worked very, very hard on it. She worked very hard on it. And she read all the Sathya Sai Speaks 10 times, he said, to get the right quotes. She worked very hard on it, and he kept the draft of the manual. He didn't get back to me, and I came back and I said, Bernice, I hope you have another copy, because he didn't give it back to me. But I think that's when the next day he called Mr. Bazzani and Dr. Goldstein and stuff, and I think later talked to Bernice. But I just remember how much of hard work she put into it, and how Swami's voice, the manual is nothing but Swami's voice, really. It's Swami's eternal message to mankind, the eternal message to mankind, so that the children grow up to become those divine beings, blossoming of character. And it is just Swami's voice that Berniece really worked to bring it out in a way that everybody could understand, so everybody could read. And it's really Swami's vision and Swami's message, but put in a beautiful little package that was the manual that Berniece made, actually. And Swami
I can't tell you how many vacations we went on. We had a motorhome, and I sat in the back while we were going down the road, because I had Sathya Sai Speaks, and I was going through all kinds of quotes, but it was for me. I mean, I learned a lot. I mean, it was really, you think maybe it was for you, but it wasn't. It was for me, because I needed to read all this. I needed to see it. I needed to hear it. I mean, it helped me grow. It was really a growing time. Swami had I mean, can you imagine all these Sathya Sai Speaks? That's just truth. I mean, it's incredible. It's every discourse he gave was just full of truths. I mean, it's incredible.
And that's still available to us now in a much easier format. That's very important to understand, that we can go to Swami's discourses and find everything that Berniece has put in that manual.
Well, I don't like to think it's Berniece. I think Swami did use me as an instrument, but I can't take the credit at all, and I won't take the credit, because I had a lot of people. I had wonderful, like Corinne Cody she was a gift, because here he gave me this professional editor. I mean, she had written, and she went to the same center I did. How about that? I mean, I come home and go to the center, and she comes up to me. Well, and she wanted to give me her resume. Oh, I mean, that was Swami. To me, that is so Swami, because she knew how to put it together, and she passed away a couple of years ago, and I really miss her, because she was really a help on that manual, and she did more. I mean, she knew how to put it together, because she did it professionally, and it turned out to be a very good manual. And it was, like I said, it was professionally done by a professional editor. I mean, we did the research, but she knew how to put it together and to make it usable and readable.
As this global Sri Sathya Sai Global Council is forming, it's amazing, and certainly no coincidence that two of the people on this planet that were at the inception and so instrumental in this program, Swami has put on this call and helped guide this global council. Geetha Mohanram and Berniece Mead. I can't think of any two people that have spent so much time and energy and have been personally guided from Bhagwan in this venture, and they've been such wonderful instruments. As we're winding up, I have a couple of questions that have come in, and I think Sumana would be the perfect person to address some of these. One question from Veda is, how do you propose putting together the syllabus for this upcoming program? And another question is, can we use past manuals? Okay. So, Suma, can you address some of those questions?
Absolutely. As the two women were speaking, I was thinking about just look at them. And when you listen to them, whatever they have on the inside comes out when they speak. So the same thing happens to teachers when they're in front of children. Whoever you are on the inside is what is going to project when you're teaching children. That is why Swami, says all teachers have to be spiritual aspirants, have to be an eager spiritual aspirant, because that's what is going to come out. If our class is on Sunday, if you try to whip up a lesson on Wednesday night or Thursday night, it's not going to work. And the way Berniece read Sathya Sai Speaks, volumes and volumes and volumes, it shows the amount of notes Geetha Auntie's taken for SSE and being involved in the program shows same thing. So to address the manual, so I'm going to go address the questions in reverse. Actually, I'm going to start with the manual because we just ended with that. So in terms of using prior material, including manuals. Think of what Berniece said just now. She collated all of Swami's words and put them in a manual in a way that will be easy for teachers to understand. She did not sit and meditate under a tree and wait for guidance to come. She read books. She took Swami's words, and Swami's words are for everybody. Sathya Sai speaks, all the Vahinis, all his discourses. I personally have a collection of more than 25 discourses from Radio Sai that Swami has given only to Balvika's teachers. I'm not talking like the general discourses, because his tone to the teachers when he speaks is completely different from the general discourses. His pitch is higher. He has much more stamina, he's literally instructing, and he gives all those tiny pieces of information you need to put your lesson together. So in terms of using this manual that Berniece is talking about, it has come to my attention that it has been copyrighted. And I smiled when I heard it, because it is Swami's words. Who's copywriting whose words, right? So I'm going to answer that question on two fronts, in a practical short-term way and in a long-term way, okay? The short-term answer is, this is a manual that is sold in the Sathya Sai Book Center in Tustin. That's where we all get our books from. And each of us has paid money to buy the book. So every Balvika's teacher in this country owns that manual if they have gone through teacher training. So much like any other copyrighted book I might have in my home, that is a copyrighted book. And all of us can refer to the books we have bought and we can read them. And when it comes to, first of all, can I tell you how happy it makes me that people are actually reading the manual? I didn't think so. People would buy the manual for teacher training and then it would be sleeping in the shelf. If people are reading it, that's fantastic. When it comes to using the resource to cite, let's say I'm writing something and I'm citing something, all of what Berniece and her team have put together in the manual is only Swami's words. So she has citations of which Sathya Sai speaks she took it from. So you refer to Swami and say, Swami has said this, right? And it's very important. I want to sneak this in here. It's very important for our teachers to say which year Swami said what he said, because whatever Swami said, he said 2011 and younger than that, like 2010, 29. So it's 2009. It's important to quote that reference. So we're all going to quote when Swami said what from the manual. So that is as of today for teachers who are wondering, can I use the manual? Of course you can. You bought it, read it, use it. And when you're citing it, cite the source like you would from any other book. Long term, Swami always has a plan. We have come so long from where we used to be. Think of the stories Geetha was sharing. Think of the stories Berniece was sharing. 1981 she went, or sleeping in the bus stand, all those women under the tree, right? Now we have trainings over Zoom. Now teachers, one of the resources we have on our website says, ask God, not Google, because teachers go to Google to find answers. If they want a quick story, they go and find it on Google. But Swami has answers to everything. And the Sathya Sai Speaks, the volumes and volumes and volumes that Berniece read is all available digitally today. All the Vahinis that Swami handwrote himself is available digitally. Radio Sai has tons of resources. We have way too many resources. We don't know how to use them, So in the future, for the long term, with Swami's blessings, we may come up with a new manual that is easy to use, where everything is digital, where teachers can click on a link and listen to prayers. And because times have changed, the way people operate has changed. But for that, Swami always says, Samayam and Sandarpam, time and circumstance, they will come together. It's a long-term project. It can happen. So I hope it answered both the questions of can I use the materials, and things that are explicitly copyrighted. If anybody is using them, they need to be cited clearly, like you would cite any copyrighted material, because Swami would expect that of us to be ethical. So, but I do want to say, being the national education coordinator, I do want to say it is none of our, I say our, because I take into consideration teachers, I take into consideration families, children, the two ladies here, and all the men and ladies who have served this program across the world. On behalf of all of them, I want to say that it is not our intention to make anything loveless. I think that's the word I would like to use. Nothing is going to be loveless. Anything about the manual, you can do this, you cannot, we don't want to get into any of that stuff. This is focus on Swami. And I always, my father said to me, face the sun, face Swami. When you face him, you will never see a shadow. The moment you turn away from the sun, you're going to see big shadows. And those are of fear, of politics, of hatred, of pettiness that we don't need, because Swami would not approve of them. So as a coordinator, I'll be guiding all the center officers in detail on how they can go about supporting the teachers and supporting the children, because children are children, no matter where they're from. Families are families, no matter where they're from. So that was the manual. What was the other question? Did I miss that? You said materials, and then you asked me about.
Yeah, the past manual, and then the vision for the upcoming.
Oh, the vision. Yeah. So people often think that, this is the Sri Sathya Sai Global Council. It's newly come up. There's not going to be any SSC because they don't know what they're doing. We have all the stuff. Well, I want to say that is not the right way to think, because as we heard the last hour and past 1 hour, is this program has been existing. I would say, I think Divinity didn't share the coffee can story, the banks of Chitravati, where Swami would play with the children. In my heart, Balvika started there. The banks of Chitravati, right?
Right.
Where the coffee can passed around, and if you pick something good, you go sit next to Swami, and if not, so, or when he played snakes and ladders, chutes and ladders with her, teaching her the last roll of the dice. When you give your dice to God, he will roll it and he'll make you reach the goal. Guess what? My dice is in his hands. Our dice is in his hands right now. So the program will continue because it's always existed irrespective of who's there and who's not there. Let's say one day the organizations all magically vanish. I will tell you, this class will still go on because there is going to be some auntie lady somewhere telling children stories and telling them to be good people. Mm-hmm. We don't, and one journalist asked Swami in the interview room, he said, Swami, what is the purpose of the Sai organization? Swami said to him, nothing is the purpose. So this man was like, wait, what? He just said nothing. He has like 200 million countries. People are following him. There's people sitting outside, and is a little bit of an atheist. Swami said nothing. So this man took courage to interrupt Swami and asked Swami, what is the purpose? You just said nothing is the purpose. What do you mean nothing is the purpose? And Swami said, you can close all your Sai centers right now and leave, put a big lock in it and go, but the world will still go on. The Sai Center is there for you to become a better person. The world doesn't need you, because we can all walk away today and say, no bhajan, no service. I'm not going to go sing. I'm not going to take Balvikas. We can say anything we want. But Swami's world, God's world will still go on. We go to the center, we hold these positions, we do what we do, we serve. And teaching children is a sadhana. It's a labor of love, so that we become better individuals. The Sai Center is a tool to transformation, just like Balvikas is a tool to transformation. So this program is going to continue with Global Council. No, hands down, yes. There's plenty of wisdom around the world. We have teachers around the world who have wisdom to share. We have now we can collaborate with India. We have wisdom. to go down. And all the wisdom comes together. We're going to have a beautiful product for the children. There's going to be collaboration. What is my vision? My vision, I don't have a vision. It's Swami's vision. Swami's vision is every child, the conscience of that child is so bright that that child leads the world. So that is Swami's vision. I don't have a vision. I have goals though. My goal is to make sure that all our teachers are trained well. All our teachers are familiar with Swami's teachings. All our teachers read, because Swami says spiritual background is important for children, for teachers. Because when you go there without preparing for your class, that child will sense you in flat 30 seconds and tune out. Even if it is a group 1 child, it's a group 3 child. So to make sure that every center serves its community the best way it can and serves their children the best way they can. And my job is to support those communities and see how best I can help them develop their program from where it is to the next level. So whatever it takes, I will do, tap into all the resources, and Swami is in the driver's seat. So he will take it to its destination. So I hope that helps.
Yes, wonderful answer. The program will be very, very strong because Swami is leading it.
Right.
We're running over, and I can't end this session without giving each of the panelists a couple of minutes just to maybe give a word of advice to teachers and parents who may be confused with this current situation and moving forward with teaching the children. Maybe if each of the panelists can just address that a couple of minutes each, that would be very, very helpful. Sairam. Berniece, maybe you can start.
Well, basically, the program is about, I am God, I am God, I am no different from God. I am the infinite supreme, the one reality. I am Satchidananda Swarupa. I am Om Tassaro. Amen.
Amen. Sairam.
Amen. Amen. Yes, as Sumana, very nice to hear, Sumana. I'm sure with Swami's blessings, all of you, the office bearers, will work, of course, for the Sai centers, and you will work very hard to make sure that the teachers feel comfortable to go into those classes with the training and so on and so forth, to actually give their very best. And as Swami said, if the teachers themselves have the desire to practice Satya, Dharma, Shanti, Prema, Nitya Jivana Yatralo. So if they are willing to practice that in their daily lives themselves, and they themselves are passengers in that journey, Swami will help them to teach those children also to learn that. I'm sure as far as the resources are concerned, till you make a new manual or book or anything, just go to Radio Sai. There is tons of material that Swami has given, and as she herself said, there are 24 or 25 discourses given, especially for Balavika's gurus to learn and then continue to teach the children. And I'm sure with everybody's help, Sumana will come up, and we have our original manual writer, Berniece. She will help Sumana. I'm sure we will all put in our effort and provide as many resources as possible for the teachers to continue the Sri Sathya Sai spiritual education. It is a long name. I'm sure we will all think of something shorter, but that is what it is, spiritual education. And I hope that will continue so that our children really become the noble souls that Swami visualized when he started the program in 1968. Sairam.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, I want to address both parents and teachers at this point. I want to say, there's this fear I sense of, is this program going to be too Hindu? My child is born and brought up here. Are you going to make my child all Indian? And the answer is no. And the answer is no. The answer is no, because if you heard what Swami's vision for the program is from day one, it is for all children. It is for children from the time, Swami says the first 5 years of a child's life, the parents are the mother is the God, the mother is the teacher. And once the child is 6 years old, the child is eligible to come to these classes, and they come every weekend. And what the child needs is what we give as a community for that child. We give it through the 5 human values. We tell them stories. They engage in service activities. They practice what they have learned in the class at home. They're engaging with their peers. They're in like-minded company. And they learn about all religions. They learn to sing. They learn to give talks in the center. And they learn to be good human beings. So it doesn't matter whether you are from India or you're from Africa, you're from Asia. It doesn't matter, from Alaska. It doesn't matter. The moment we get stuck up with, well, I'm born and brought up here, I can tell you, having gone to the program in India myself and having raised an adult child here, that nothing is different. Everything is the same. Truth is truth, no matter where you go. So nobody is going to convert anybody into anything. There will be conversion to God, to realizing that you will be divine. So I want to assure parents that all your children are in good hands, because there are a lot of good people out there. All our teachers are voluntary volunteers. They come because they want to come. They come because they want to teach. Nobody gets paid. Nobody can get, people have, since the pandemic started, Axay, I have to tell you how humbling it is to see our teachers jump on Zoom, old aunties who've never used technology before, adapting to it and doing their best, So this program will go on. So to all the parents, your children are in good hands. For all the teachers, I want to say that continue the good work you have always been doing. And I want to actually read Swami's words to the teachers. I came across this by sheer accident, but I don't think it's an accident anymore. So here goes. Swami says in 1983, 14th of June, do not condemn yourselves as petty peddlers of knowledge. You are the makers of the future of mankind. I'm going to say that again. You are the makers of the future of mankind. You can make it bright and joyful, or mar it as dreary and dreadful. You can weaken or strengthen the foundations of life. You are the planners and engineers who lay the royal road of peace and prosperity. You are the ray of hope that illumines the dismal night enveloping all countries. You are the revealers of the divine power that animates every living being and prompts it towards self-sacrifice and self-knowledge. You mark out and build the proper steps for man's ascent to God. You direct the eyes of the pupils inward into the reality and invite them to revel in that light. You hasten the holy process of ignoring and forgetting the superficial and advancing the divine consciousness, which is the reality of man. Swami says teachers are kingmakers. And to those teachers, I want to say that Swami is with you, like Geetha Auntie said, when you have the good intention to do good work, all the little problems that come our way will go away, because whatever you're doing is not selfish, it is selfless. So with that, thank you and Sairam.
Sairam.
I want to take the liberty to just answer this last question from Sister Ananti. She says, in my experience, most of the gurus are YA girls and ladies. Does the Global Council have any specific plans to attract YA boys or men to the program? So the answer I'm going to give is, Swami, as Geetha Auntie said earlier, is, women have this natural proclivity as mothers to give that love, which is the most important part of the program. So us men and boys, what we need to do is follow the examples of Berniece, Geetha, and Sumana. And yes, there is space for us to learn and become teachers in this program. So with that, I just want to thank our panelists. I know I've learned so much and enjoyed the stories, and they are all available for answering any questions down the road. They will be steering this program. And again, this is no coincidence. Swami is putting all of this together, and he's putting the right people in the right place. And as long as his name starts this program, it is bound to succeed. So with that, I want to turn it back over to our USA National President, Balu Karanam. Sairam, everyone.
Sairam. Sairam, it is wonderful to hear all the panelists. It's a blessing of Swami. Swami sent at the right time this wonderful SSC, spiritual education teachers, and also who worked on the manual and submitted and blessed this manual at the Prashant Nilayam actually. So Swami has come for the entire world, and Swami's message is universal. As Swami used to beautifully say when we were students, Matamulanniyu cheri manchine bodinche telisi melagavalayu telivitoda matulu manchivaina matamedi cheddadi marva boku ditti manchi mata. Saying that all religions in the world taught love and good things only. See, we need to understand this and move forward with some kind of telivi, intellect and intelligence. Matulu manchivaina, if our minds are pure, which religion is bad, he says, the beautiful Lord. Because our minds go bad and we say, when God blesses the manual and we say man copyrights the manual, this kind of things. Let's not think about all that. Swami's material, Sai education material and manuals belong to everyone. Let us move forward with that energy. And all of you, those who are hearing, what you need to do is make this message and reach every SSC coordinator in this country and SSC teacher. They have to see this entire program. I wish we had more time for this panelists actually. And also finally, why Global Council? Still some people ask, because let's say we are going towards Parthi in a bus that breaks down, it no longer can go. What do? We take the bus which goes to Puttaparthi, isn't it? Our connection is to Puttaparthi. We need to get on to the bus which takes us to Puttaparthi, our source. That's where our Sathya Sai started this wonderful mission. Actually, with that, serve locally, connect globally. Our connection is only to Prashanti Nilayam, our service to only to Bhagavan Sat Sai Baba. That is Sri Sathya Sai Global Council. And one small note, today Haiti was hit by 7.2 magnitude earthquake. So there is quite a bit of, problem going on. And also because of a tropical storm there called Grace, the relief efforts are also getting affected. Let us keep, all these families in Haiti in our prayers. Let us do, 3 Samasta Lokas today before we conclude this program. With that, thanking you all for coming to this program. Jai Sairam. Samasta Loka Sukhino Bhavantu. Samasta Loka Sukhino Bhavantu. Samasta Loka Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.